My future wife was hiding from me that she wanted to betray me. She cheated on me during the summer vacation. After the separation, she and I went our separate ways. Nathan sat in utter disbelief, his mind reeling as he listened to Leah finish her explanation. He could feel frustration and anger rising within him, each word she spoke making it worse. It had started as a normal Saturday afternoon drive, one of their regular weekend outings, but now, everything seemed to unravel. They were on their way to the concert, something they had both been looking forward to for weeks, when Nathan had casually brought up the idea of taking a break together after Leah's graduation from her college program. He'd been thinking about it for a while, imagining a quiet, peaceful getaway in the mountains, just the two of them, away from everything. But Leah's response wasn't what he expected. "Nathan," Leah said, her tone soft but firm, "I already told you. I'm leaving with Sarah and Emma the day after graduation. We've had this trip planned for years. We're going to travel the entire summer, across the states. We've already got everything set, packed, saved up, the whole thing." Nathan tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. "You can't be serious. I thought we talked about this. You said we'd focus on us after graduation, not on some crazy road trip with your friends. What happened to that?" Leah turned to him, her expression calm but resolute, like she had expected this reaction. "Nathan, I never agreed to cancel the trip. This is something I've been planning with them since we started college. We've saved every cent, worked extra hours, and made sacrifices to make this happen. You knew this was always the plan. I thought we were moving past this." Nathan's voice raised, frustration bubbling over. "We're engaged, Leah. We're supposed to be focusing on building a life together. You can't just run off for the whole summer with those two. What about us?" Leah's eyes narrowed slightly, her patience thinning. "Nathan, this isn't about us versus them. This is about a trip I've wanted to take for a long time. I trusted you when you went off for your work retreats and weekends with your old college buddies. You know how much this trip means to me." Nathan shook his head, his anger intensifying. "You know the difference. I went on those retreats for work, not to party for months with friends. Do you think I don't know how Sarah and Emma act when they're away from home? They get wild. And you, spending the entire summer with them, drinking, partying. What do you think is going to happen?" Leah crossed her arms defensively. "Those are my best friends, Nathan. I won't let you talk about them like that. Besides, you're blowing this way out of proportion. We're just going to have some fun, see new places, and then I'll come back to you. Nothing's going to change between us." Nathan's jaw tightened, his voice lowering as he struggled to keep his temper in check. "If you go on this trip, everything will change. You might not see it now, but I do. If you're off with them all summer, things won't be the same when you come back. Do you really think we can just pick up where we left off? Do you even care what this means for us?" Leah shook her head, exasperated. "Nathan, I love you. I'm not trying to break up with you, but I need to go on this trip. It's something I've always dreamed of, and I'm not going to cancel it because you're suddenly insecure about me being away for a couple of months." Nathan stared straight ahead, his eyes fixed on the road but his mind racing. He felt as if the ground was shifting beneath him, everything he thought they had together unraveling in the space of this conversation. "I'll tell you this," Nathan said, his voice firm and steady. "If you go on this trip, don't expect things to be the same when you get back. If you choose this, you're choosing them over me, over us." Leah's expression softened slightly, but she didn't back down. "Nathan, you're being unfair. This isn't about choosing between you and them. It's just a trip. I'll be back, and we can move forward like we've always planned." Nathan pulled the car into the concert venue's parking lot, the silence between them heavy and strained. The evening stretched ahead of them, but for Nathan, the excitement of the concert was gone. He could feel a knot forming in his stomach, the weight of Leah's words sinking in deeper than he expected. They parked and made their way into the concert hall, but Nathan's mind was elsewhere. The music, which he had been looking forward to all week, faded into the background as he replayed the conversation over and over again in his head. He couldn't believe Leah was going through with the trip, despite everything they had discussed about their future together. After the concert, as they walked back to the car, Leah slipped her hand into his, but Nathan didn't feel the usual warmth from the gesture. It was like there was a wall between them now, something he couldn't quite push past. You're really not going to change your mind, are you? Nathan asked quietly as they reached the car. Leah sighed, pulling her hand away. Nathan, I've made my decision. This is something I need to do for me. But that doesn't mean I don't love you. Nathan unlocked the car and climbed into the driver's seat, the silence between them more deafening than the loudest song from the concert they had just left. He started the engine but didn't move, his mind still racing. Let's just go home, Leah said softly, breaking the silence. Nathan didn't respond. He put the car in gear and drove, his thoughts too tangled to form a response. He didn't know what to say. The knot in his stomach only tightened as they got closer to her apartment. When they arrived, he parked outside her building, but instead of turning off the engine and walking her to the door like he usually did, Nathan stayed in the car. Leah unbuckled her seatbelt and looked at him expectantly. Aren't you coming in? She asked, her voice tentative. Nathan shook his head. No, Leah, I'm not coming in tonight. Leah blinked in surprise. Why not? What's going on, Nathan? We always spend the night together after these things. Nathan finally looked at her, his eyes hard. I don't know, Leah. Maybe I need some time to think. You've made your choice clear, and I need to figure out what that means for me. Leah's brow furrowed in confusion. Nathan, don't be like this. I told you, nothing's going to change between us. It's just a trip. Nathan's voice was calm, but the emotion behind it was clear. That's where you're wrong, Leah. Everything's already changed. Leah opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, she reached for the door handle, pausing for a moment before stepping out of the car. Good night, Nathan, she said quietly before closing the door behind her. Nathan watched her walk up to the door of her building, his heart heavy. He didn't move until she was inside, and even then, he sat there for a few more minutes, staring at the dashboard, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. He had never felt more uncertain about their future. When he finally pulled away from the curb and drove home, the quiet hum of the engine seemed to amplify the silence around him. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of the end, no matter what Leah had said, and the thought of it weighed on him more than he had expected. Leah stood in her apartment, leaning against the door as it clicked shut behind her. Her heart was pounding in her chest, and she could still feel the tension from their conversation lingering in the air. She knew Nathan was upset, but she couldn't understand why he was making such a big deal out of this trip. She took a deep breath and walked into the living room, where Sarah and Emma were waiting for her, both of them sprawled across the couch with glasses of wine in hand. Sarah raised an eyebrow as Leah walked in. Well? Sarah asked, a smirk playing on her lips. How'd he take it? Leah shook her head, letting out a frustrated sigh as she kicked off her shoes. Not well. He's pissed. I don't know what to do. He's acting like I'm abandoning him or something. Emma snorted and took a sip of her wine. Men always act like that when they're not the center of attention. He'll get over it. They always do. Leah flopped down onto the couch next to them, running her hands through her hair. I just don't get why he's so upset. It's not like I'm breaking up with him. It's just a trip. Sarah laughed, reaching for the bottle to refill her glass. Nathan's always been the jealous type, Leah. You know that. He's probably worried you're going to have too much fun without him. Leah frowned, crossing her arms. I don't know. He said if I go, things won't be the same when I get back. I didn't think he'd take it this seriously. Emma leaned forward, setting her glass down on the coffee table. Look, you've been planning this trip for years. It's the chance of a lifetime. You can't back out now just because your fiancé is throwing a little tantrum. He'll come around. He loves you too much not to. Leah stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. She knew Emma was right. They had been planning this trip since their freshman year, and it was something she had been looking forward to for as long as she could remember. But she couldn't shake the feeling that this was going to change things between her and Nathan in a way she hadn't anticipated. Do you think I'm being selfish? Leah asked quietly, more to herself than to her friends. Sarah and Emma exchanged a glance before Sarah spoke up. Leah, this is your life. You can't live it for someone else. If Nathan really loves you, he'll support you. And if he can't handle a few months apart, maybe he's not the right guy for you after all. Leah chewed on her bottom lip, considering her friend's words. She loved Nathan, and she didn't want to lose him. But at the same time, she couldn't give up on the dream she had worked so hard for. I just hope he understands, Leah muttered, more to herself than to anyone else. The next few days passed in a haze for Nathan. He went through the motions of his daily routine: work, gym, home. But his mind was constantly on Leah and the decision she had made. He hadn't spoken to her since that night, and he didn't know if he was ready to. He knew she was leaving soon. Every time he thought about it, a knot of frustration and uncertainty formed in his chest. Part of him wanted to confront her, to beg her to stay. But another part of him, the part that was growing louder by the day, told him that if she could just leave him like this, then maybe they weren't meant to be after all. On the morning of Leah's departure, Nathan found himself driving over to her apartment without even thinking about it. He needed to see her, to talk to her one last time before she left. Maybe they could work things out, or at least get some closure. When he arrived, the parking lot was nearly empty, and he spotted Leah's car still in its usual spot. He parked nearby and sat in his truck for a moment, staring at the building. He wasn't sure what he was going to say, but he knew he couldn't let her leave without talking to her first. He got out of the truck and made his way to the front door, his heart pounding in his chest. He knocked, and after a few moments, Leah opened the door, her eyes widening in surprise when she saw him standing there. "Nathan," she said softly, stepping aside to let him in. Nathan walked inside, his eyes scanning the apartment. It was mostly packed up, with boxes stacked near the door and a few suitcases sitting by the couch. It hit him then, the reality of her leaving. She was really going. I needed to see you before you left," Nathan said, his voice strained. Leah nodded, her expression sad. "I'm glad you came. I've been wanting to talk to you too." Nathan looked at her, his heart aching. "Are you really going to go through with this?" Leah sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Nathan, I have to. This is something I've wanted for a long time. It's not about choosing between you and them. It's about me, and what I need right now." Nathan clenched his fists, struggling to keep his emotions in check. "And what about us? What happens when you get back? Do you really think everything's just going to go back to normal?" Leah's eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head. "I don't know, Nathan. I wish I could tell you that everything will be fine, but I can't make that promise. All I know is that I need to go." Nathan took a step closer, his voice breaking. "Leah, I love you. I don't want to lose you." Leah wiped at her eyes, her voice trembling. "I love you too, Nathan. But I need to do this." Nathan closed his eyes, the weight of her words crashing down on him. He knew then that there was nothing more he could say, nothing that would change her mind. He had lost her, at least for now. "Goodbye, Leah," Nathan whispered, his heart breaking as he turned and walked out the door. Leah stood in the doorway, watching him leave, tears streaming down her face. She knew she was making the right choice for herself, but that didn't make it any easier. Nathan drove away from Leah's apartment, his heart heavy with the weight of their final conversation. He had hoped that seeing her one last time would give him some clarity, some sense of closure, but all it did was confirm what he already feared. This was the end. No matter what Leah had said about their love and their future, the fact that she could so easily choose her trip over their relationship spoke volumes to him. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of a long, painful separation. He tried to keep busy in the days that followed, throwing himself into his work and hitting the gym more frequently than usual, but nothing could take his mind off Leah. Everywhere he went, he was reminded of her. Whether it was the song that came on the radio as he drove to work or the empty side of the bed that seemed even colder now that she was truly gone. The silence in his apartment was deafening. Nathan's friends tried to help in the way they knew best, by inviting him out for drinks or pushing him to join them in their usual weekend activities. But every time he went out, he felt like he was just going through the motions. He laughed when he was supposed to, smiled at the jokes, but inside, he felt hollow. One evening, a few weeks after Leah had left, Nathan found himself sitting at the bar with his friend Chris. The two had known each other since college, and Chris had been one of the few people Nathan confided in when everything with Leah had started going south. Chris was the kind of guy who never sugar-coated things, And that was exactly what Nathan needed right now. So, Chris said, taking a long swig of his beer before turning to Nathan, you've been moping around for weeks now. It's time to snap out of it, man. You're acting like it's the end of the world. Nathan sighed, swirling the ice in his glass before answering. It kind of feels like it, doesn't it? I mean, Leah and I were supposed to be planning our future together. Now she's off gallivanting across the country, and I'm here, stuck in this mess. Chris shook his head, setting his beer down on the bar with a thud. Look, I'm going to be real with you. She's made her choice, and now it's time for you to make yours. You can't just sit around waiting for her to come back, hoping things will magically fix themselves. You need to decide what you want. Nathan stared at his drink, the words sinking in. He knew Chris was right, but it was easier said than done. What if she comes back and everything's the same? What if we can work things out? Chris snorted, leaning back in his chair. Man, you've got to stop holding on to false hope. She left you, Nate. She put herself and her friends above your relationship. Even if she comes back, do you really think you'll be able to trust her the way you used to? Relationships are built on trust, and I hate to break it to you, but that's shattered now. Nathan ran a hand through his hair, frustration bubbling to the surface. I know. I don't know what to do. I thought we had a future together. Chris slapped him on the back, offering a sympathetic smile. We all think that at some point, but sometimes things just don't work out the way we want. You've got to pick yourself up and move on. And who knows? Maybe there's someone out there who's actually ready to build that future with you. Nathan wanted to believe Chris, but it still felt like a massive part of his life had been ripped away, leaving an emptiness that couldn't be filled. As the night wore on and the bar grew more crowded, Nathan found himself slipping into the background of his own life, watching from a distance as everything continued without him. Leah's summer adventure, on the other hand, was everything she had hoped it would be. She, Sarah, and Emma had packed up Leah's car and hit the road just as planned. They traveled across the country, stopping in small towns, national parks, and cities they had always wanted to visit. It was the freedom they had craved for years, and they made the most of every moment. For the first few weeks, Leah tried to stay in touch with Nathan. She would send him pictures of the places they visited, short messages about their adventures, and the occasional phone call when she had a moment of quiet. But the responses she got from him were short and cold, and eventually, she stopped trying. As the weeks stretched into months, Leah found herself thinking about Nathan less and less. The excitement of the trip, the new experiences, and the constant companionship of her friends filled her days, leaving little room for thoughts of what she had left behind. There was a part of her that felt guilty about how easily she had let go, but another part of her, the part that had always craved independence, felt liberated. One night, as they camped under the stars in a national park in Utah, Leah lay in her sleeping bag, staring up at the clear, starry sky. Emma and Sarah were already asleep in their tents, but Leah couldn't shake the feeling of restlessness that had settled over her. She had always dreamed of this kind of freedom, of seeing the world and living without constraints, but now that she had it, she wasn't sure it was everything she had imagined. She reached for her phone, scrolling through her messages until she found Nathan's name. Her finger hovered over the screen, but she didn't press send. What would she even say? That she missed him? That she was sorry? The truth was, she didn't know what she felt anymore. Instead, she turned off her phone and rolled onto her side, pulling her sleeping bag tighter around her. The night air was cool, and the sound of crickets filled the silence. For the first time in weeks, Leah felt the weight of her decisions pressing down on her. Back home, Nathan was slowly starting to rebuild his life without Leah. After that conversation with Chris, he had decided to take a step back and reevaluate what he wanted. It wasn't easy, but he started making small changes, spending more time with friends, focusing on his career, and even picking up some new hobbies to fill the void. One evening, as he was leaving the office, his coworker Lauren stopped him by the elevator. "Hey, Nathan," she said, smiling brightly. "A few of us are grabbing dinner at that new place down the street. Want to join us?" Nathan hesitated for a moment. He wasn't exactly in the mood for socializing, but he also knew that isolating himself wouldn't do him any good. "Sure," he replied, offering a small smile in return. "Sounds like fun." The group of co-workers ended up at a cozy little restaurant with outdoor seating. The evening air was warm, and the conversation flowed easily around the table. Nathan found himself laughing and engaging in the banter, and for the first time in a while, he felt genuinely at ease. Lauren, who was sitting across from him, seemed to notice the shift in his demeanor. "You seem more relaxed tonight," she commented with a grin. "I'm glad you came." Nathan chuckled, taking a sip of his drink. "Yeah, I guess I've been a little out of it lately." Lauren raised an eyebrow. "A little? Try a lot. Everyone's been worried about you. But it's good to see you smiling again." Nathan smiled, grateful for the support. "Thanks, Lauren. I think I just needed a reminder that life goes on." As the evening wore on, Nathan found himself enjoying Lauren's company more and more. They talked about everything from work to travel, and he realized just how easy it was to be around her. She had a way of making him forget about his problems, even if only for a little while. By the time the night ended, Nathan felt lighter than he had in weeks. As he said goodbye to his coworkers and walked back to his car, he couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, things were starting to look up. Leah's road trip was winding down by the time August rolled around. She and her friends had seen everything they had set out to see, and more. They had hiked in national parks, explored vibrant cities, and spent countless nights camping under the stars. It had been a whirlwind adventure, but now that the end was in sight, Leah found herself feeling a mix of emotions. She hadn't spoken to Nathan in weeks. At first, she had convinced herself that it was for the best, that they both needed space to figure things out. But as the days passed, the distance between them felt more like a chasm that couldn't be bridged. She wondered what he was doing, if he had moved on, or if he was waiting for her to come back. As they drove through the final stretch of their trip, Leah sat in the back seat, staring out the window as the landscape blurred by. Sarah and Emma were chatting in the front, their excitement about returning home palpable. But Leah couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in her chest. What was she going to do when she got back? Could things with Nathan really go back to the way they were before? Nathan was at the gym one evening when he got a text from Leah. He hadn't heard from her in over a month, and seeing her name flash across the screen sent a jolt of emotions through him. He hesitated before opening the message. "Hey Nathan, I'm coming back into town next week. I'd really like to talk when I get back." Nathan stared at the words, his heart racing. He had spent the last few weeks trying to move on, and now, out of the blue, Leah wanted to talk. Part of him wanted to ignore the message, to protect himself from whatever pain this conversation might bring. But another part of him, the part that still cared about her, needed closure. He typed out a response before he could second-guess himself. "Sure. Let me know when you're back." When Leah returned, the city felt different to her, as if everything had moved forward while she had been standing still. She had expected to feel relief at being home, but instead, she was filled with a sense of uncertainty. The trip had been everything she wanted, yet now that it was over, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she had lost something important along the way. The day she and Nathan planned to meet, Leah stood in front of her mirror, her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't seen him in months, and she wasn't sure what to expect. Would he be angry? Distant? Had he moved on? When she finally arrived at the cafe where they had agreed to meet, Leah spotted Nathan sitting at a table by the window. He looked different, older, more confident, but there was still something familiar about him that tugged at her heart. "Nathan," she said softly as she approached the table. He looked up, his expression neutral as he stood to greet her. "Leah." They sat down, an awkward silence hanging between them. Leah didn't know where to start. The last time they had seen each other, everything had felt so final. Now, it was as if they were two strangers, trying to figure out how to reconnect. "I'm glad you came," Leah said after a few moments. "I wasn't sure if you would." Nathan shrugged, his tone even. "You wanted to talk. So talk." Leah took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "I know things didn't end well between us before I left, and I'm sorry for how I handled everything. I shouldn't have just left without working through things with you." Nathan nodded, but he didn't say anything. Leah continued, her voice quieter now. "The trip was everything I thought it would be, but I missed you. I missed us." Nathan's gaze remained steady. "Did you?" "Because from where I'm sitting, It doesn't seem like you did. Leah winced, the truth of his words cutting deep. I know it seemed like I didn't care, but I did. I just needed to do this for myself, to prove something to myself. Nathan finally leaned forward, his eyes locking with hers. And what did you prove, Leah? Leah hesitated, unsure of how to answer. I proved that I could do it, that I could be independent. But now I realize that I didn't want to do it without you. Nathan let out a bitter laugh. Well, you did do it without me, Leah. You made your choice. And I've had to live with that. Tears welled in Leah's eyes, and she blinked them away. I know I hurt you, Nathan. I never wanted to, but I did. And I'm so sorry. Nathan sat back in his chair, crossing his arms. What do you want from me, Leah? Forgiveness? A second chance? Leah shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know. I just wanted to see you, to talk to you. I needed to know if there was still something between us. Nathan was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke, his voice softer than before. Leah, I don't know if I can ever trust you again. You left, and you didn't look back. You chose them over me, over us. Leah's heart shattered at his words, but she knew they were true. She had made her choice, and now she was living with the consequences. I understand, she whispered, her voice breaking. I wanted you to know that I still love you. Nathan looked at her, his eyes filled with a sadness she hadn't seen before. I loved you too, Leah. But sometimes love isn't enough. The words hung between them like a final goodbye, and Leah felt the weight of them settle over her. She had lost him, and there was no going back. After a long silence, Nathan stood up, sliding his chair back. Take care of yourself, Leah. Leah nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She watched as he walked out of the cafe, her heart breaking all over again. She had always known that this day would come, but now that it was here, the reality of it was almost too much to bear. Leah sat there for a long time after Nathan left, her mind replaying their conversation over and over again. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with it. But as painful as it was, Leah knew that it was the right thing to do. She had needed to find herself, to prove that she could stand on her own. And while it had cost her the man she loved, she knew that she had grown from the experience. Life would go on, and so would she. Nathan walked away from the cafe, his heart heavy but his mind clear. He had finally gotten the closure he needed, and while it hurt to say goodbye to Leah, he knew that it was the right thing to do. As he made his way down the street, Nathan felt a sense of relief wash over him. The chapter with Leah was finally closed, and now he could focus on building a new future for himself, one that wasn't defined by the past. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, Nathan felt hopeful. And that was enough. With that, both Nathan and Leah moved forward, their paths no longer intertwined. The pain of their separation would linger for a while, but they both knew that it was necessary for their growth. Nathan walked away from the cafe that day with an unfamiliar weight on his shoulders. The conversation with Leah had been painful but cathartic in a way he hadn't anticipated. He had finally said the things he needed to say, the things that had been building up inside him for months. He had loved Leah deeply, but there was no going back now. The past had shaped them both, and they had grown apart. Still, the ache of letting her go felt more like a slow burn than the fiery anger he had expected. He was exhausted from holding on to hope, and now that hope had been released, he felt lighter, even if only slightly.